The Little Albert Experiment. In 1920, John B. Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner conducted a study on little Albert to explore the concept of classical conditioning. Albert was a mere 9-month-old infant. Initially, Albert was not afraid of rats, rabbits, or other stimuli. They exposed Albert to a white rat and then made a loud noise every time he reached for it. Albert began to associate the rat with the noise and developed a fear response, crying and attempting to run away whenever the rat was presented, even without the noise. This fear was generalized, and Albert retained this fear to similar furry animals, such as rabbits, dogs, and even a fur coat, demonstrating classical conditioning, Harlo's pit of despair. In the 1950s, a psychologist named Harlo conducted an experiment to explore attachment by isolating infant monkeys from their mothers. The aim of the project was to study depression in animals. The babies were given 2 types of surrogate mothers, one made of wire and one made of soft cloth. They were all placed in a device called the vertical chamber apparatus. These infant monkeys were placed in the apparatus and isolated from their mother and the outside world for 10 weeks, or sometimes even up to a year. Despite the wire mother providing food, the monkeys spent most of their time clinging to the soft, comforting cloth mother. After a few days, the infant monkeys would huddle up in a corner and remain motionless. His research resulted in monkeys that lacked social skills, were unable to play or interact normally with other monkeys, and also were incapable of taking care of their offspring, often neglecting or abusing their younglings. Milgrams' obedience experiment. Milgrams' obedience experiment, conducted in 1961 by psychologist Stanley Milgram, explored the extent to which people would obey authority figures, even when asked to perform actions conflicting with their personal conscience. The study was inspired by questions about the behavior of individuals during the Holocaust, where people followed orders despite knowing that they resulted in harm to others. Participants were recruited as part of a learning experiment and were assigned the role of teachers. They were instructed to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to a learner who was just an actor. Whenever they answered questions incorrectly, the teacher was instructed to shock them. The shocks ranged from mild to a potentially lethal 450 volts. The learner, seated in another room, did not actually receive shocks but acted as though they were in pain, expressing distress, screaming, or eventually falling silent. Despite the learner's apparent suffering, a significant majority of participants, about 65%, continued to administer shocks up to the maximum voltage when prompted by the experimenter, who used verbal prods such as, quote, "The experiment requires that you continue." Participants often showed visible signs of stress, such as sweating and trembling, but still obeyed the authority figure. The experiment highlighted that fear of authority and situational pressure could compel individuals to act against their own moral values. Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment was conducted in 1971 by psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. It was a 2-week simulation experiment set up in a mock prison in the basement of the university. The objective was to study the psychological effects of perceived power. 75 men applied, out of which 24 were selected for the experiment, specifically excluding individuals with medical or psychological problems and people of criminal backgrounds. They were divided into groups of prisoners and guards. Within just a few days, the guards began showing abusive behavior and the prisoners became stressed and submissive. They forced prisoners to do push-ups, prevented them from using the bathrooms, and also forced them to relieve themselves in buckets. As the days went on, the guards became more and more abusive, humiliating the prisoners for their entertainment. Many prisoners reported having mental breakdowns. The experiment was stopped after a mere 6 days instead of 14 due to the increasingly concerning behavior of the guards. Zimbardo, who was also involved in the study, failed to stop the abuse on multiple occasions. While it received widespread criticism for putting participants at risk of psychological harm, but it also demonstrated that seemingly normal individuals would abuse authority when given. These controversial experiments pushed the boundaries of psychology and led to significant discoveries, but they also raised fundamental ethical questions that still resonate today. Were the benefits of these studies worth the harm that they caused? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.